More and more states are adopting and proposing to limit PFAS in products, with many of these rules targeting firefighting foam and protective gear. For example, Illinois enacted Public Act 104-0221, which introduces new requirements for firefighting gear. Beginning January 2026, any company selling firefighting personal protective clothing containing PFAS must provide written notice at the time of sale, stating that the gear contains PFAS and explain why these chemicals were added. Similarly, in Pennsylvania, the General Assembly introduced SB 980 to impose new restrictions on companies that use, manufacture, or sell Class B firefighting foam and firefighting PPE. The bill would prohibit the manufacture, sale, or distribution of Class B firefighting foam containing intentionally added PFAS chemicals starting in July 2026. Ban its use at facilities beginning in January 2027, unless required under federal law or at exempt facilities. Going beyond firefighting and PPE, Vermont enacted Act 54, which establishes one of the most comprehensive state-level PFAS phase-outs for consumer products. The law prohibits the manufacture, sale, or distribution of products containing intentionally added PFAS across multiple categories. By July 2027, PFAS are banned from cleaning products, dental floss, and fluorine-treated containers. By July 2028, PFAS is banned in cookware, and by July 2029, PFAS will be banned from firefighting PPE. Manufacturers must also provide disclosure and labeling for PFAS-containing products. And in that same vein, PFAS, as it pertains to water, has also seen a lot of development. Next slide, please. At the federal level, the EPA announced its intention to rescind and reconsider regulatory determinations for certain PFAS chemicals, which are listed on the slide, which have maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs, of 10 parts per trillion, and the hazard index mixture of these chemicals. Although no official proposal has been released yet, recent deregulatory trends strongly indicate that one is on the horizon. And while these chemicals would no longer require such extensive monitoring, EPA has said it will maintain the 2024 National Primary Drinking Water Regulations of 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS. EPA also announced its intent to extend the PFOA and PFOS MCL compliance deadlines by another 2 years, making compliance mandatory in April 2028 instead of 2026, and establish a federal exemption framework. Some states, like Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, Washington State, and Maine, have taken it upon themselves to adopt these standards before the EPA updates its regulations in order to maintain strict PFAS standards. Wisconsin, for example, proposed revisions to its safe drinking water regulations to update drinking water standards for PFAS to align with the 2024 federal requirements under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Additionally, on October 1st, 2025, North Carolina finalized amendments to incorporate by reference the 2024 federal PFAS drinking water standards requiring facilities operating public water systems to monitor drinking water according to federal sampling, frequency, and analytical requirements. Beginning April 2027, facilities must conduct initial PFAS monitoring based on system size and source water, submit reports to the department, and follow ongoing monitoring schedules, quarterly if PFAS exceed trigger levels or every 3 years if below. Continuing from what was discussed during the mid-year webinar, the U.S. has firmly set in motion its deregulatory plans by formally publishing deregulation proposals on key environmental regulations. In August 2025, the EPA proposed rescinding all greenhouse gas emission standards for light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles and engines. The proposal would eliminate requirements related to emissions limits, test procedures, reporting, and fleet average standards. If adopted, manufacturers, sellers, and importers of such vehicles and engines would no longer have to measure, control, or report GHG emissions for any vehicle or engine, including previously manufactured model years. Within the same proposal, the EPA also intends to revoke the 2009 endangerment finding, which is the scientific finding that greenhouse gas emissions are harmful to public health and welfare, and is the basis for all climate change regulation within the United States. Similarly, in September 2025, the EPA proposed amendments to the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, or GHGRP, to remove reporting obligations for most source categories after the 2024 reporting year and suspend requirements for petroleum and natural gas systems until 2034. The GHGRP requires facilities in over 40 industrial categories, such as facilities operating boilers or process heaters and chemical manufacturers that emit 25,000 metric tons or more of CO2 equivalent GHGs annually, to report emissions on carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. Under the proposal, companies that emit, supply, or sequester GHGs would no longer need to collect data, monitor, or report emissions. Like in South America and in the EU, extended producer responsibility has also become a major focus in the US, especially EPR focused on batteries. Next slide, please. It's estimated that the US is still years away from finalizing a national EPR battery framework, but steps are being taken to make it happen. Throughout 2025 and continuing into 2026, the EPA is hosting a series of working sessions focused on developing a national EPR framework that will cover all battery types, including lithium-based and alkaline batteries. While progress at the federal level remains gradual, momentum is building at the state level, where several states have already finalized or proposed their own battery stewardship programs. Colorado and Connecticut have both enacted EPR laws for batteries, SB 25-163 and Public Act 2534 respectively, requiring producers to finance and participate in state-approved battery stewardship organizations. These organizations must submit detailed stewardship plans to their respective state agencies outlining how they will collect, transport, process, and recycle covered batteries. Plans must include producer contact information, performance goals, and public education strategies. Producers would be responsible for all program costs and would have to ensure proper labeling on batteries to identify the producer and provide recycling information. Compliance timelines are similar across both states. Producers must participate in an approved program by mid-2027, and retailers may only sell batteries from compliant producers in starting mid-2029. Now we can move on to the next slide and cover worker health and safety. Heat illness protections remain a key focus, with many states advancing their own standards while awaiting further progress on the federal heat illness proposal introduced in 2021. However, there is currently an attempt to stop this proposal in its tracks, as the Heat Workforce Safety Standards Act of 2025 was introduced to repeal the proposed OSHA heat legislation, arguing it heavily burdens industries that already have rigorous safety protocols. While this increases the uncertainty surrounding a federal standard, many states have introduced their own heat illness standards. In Pennsylvania, for example, House Bill 1580 was proposed to require employers to implement measures to prevent heat-related injuries and illnesses. If enacted, companies would have to develop and maintain a written heat prevention plan detailing procedures for monitoring heat index values, providing cool potable water, paid rest breaks, shaded or climate-controlled areas, emergency response protocols, and a heat alert system based on National Weather Service forecasts. Companies would need to make this plan available to all employees, review it annually, and update it as needed. The bill also prohibits retaliation against employees who refuse unsafe work due to heat risk and establishes penalties for noncompliance. States like Arizona have also paved the way for their own heat illness protection standards, as Governor Hobbs signed an executive order directing 2 Arizona agencies to create a workplace heat safety task force and draft employer heat safety guidelines by December 31st, 2025. These guidelines, intended for a summer 2026 implementation, would provide clarity for employers on mitigating heat hazards. I also want to highlight on the next slide some developments surrounding workplace harassment prevention happening at the state and federal level. U.S. House Resolution 4599 was introduced to impose new workplace discrimination and sexual harassment disclosure, training, and investigation requirements on all public companies registered under the Securities Exchange Act. The bill would require companies to include detailed information in annual and quarterly reports, such as the number of harassment and discrimination claims received, resolved, and under investigation, settlements and court judgments, aggregate payments made, and case outcomes. Reports would also require attestations from senior executives and board members confirming compliance and oversight. The bill further mandates annual workplace training for all employees, specialized training for managers and HR staff, and additional training for employees found to have committed violations. Additionally, Pennsylvania introduced House Bill 1825 to amend the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act by requiring employers to adopt and implement a workplace harassment prevention policy. The policy must explain that harassment, discrimination, and retaliation are unlawful under federal and state law, clarify that sexual harassment is a form of discrimination, outline supervisor responsibilities, and establish procedures for reporting and investigating complaints while maintaining confidentiality. In the US, many states have enacted AI-related regulations that have a strong emphasis on non-discrimination, bias mitigation, and transparency in algorithmic decision-making. However, the federal government has remained largely silent on this issue until recently through an executive order titled Ensuring a National Policy Framework for Artificial Intelligence. The EO holds 4 directives. First, the Attorney General has to create an AI litigation task force whose sole responsibility is to challenge state AI laws that are inconsistent with the EO's policy to sustain and enhance the US's global AI dominance through a minimally burdensome national policy framework for AI. Second, the Commerce Secretary has to identify existing state laws that require AI models to alter their truthful outputs, which means identifying state laws that require AI to remove bias and discrimination in their outputs. The EO gives Colorado's AI Act and California's Consumer Privacy Act's Automated Decision-Making Technologies Regulation as an example of state laws that would be flagged. Third, it directs the creation of recommendations for a federal law that would preempt or supersede state laws regulating AI. And fourth, the FCC chair has to initiate proceedings for a federal reporting standard preempting state laws and to issue policy citing the FTC Act's authority to regulate deceptive acts or practices affecting commerce. Realistically, an executive order cannot preempt state law or force state action, as only Congress has that ability, but this looks like significant steps in the process of having a federal AI standard.